There are no planned fire drills this evening. If you hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. The nearest escape route is via the stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building and walk across the inner car park to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. The lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency. Please do not re-enter the building until you are advised it's safe to do so by a member of staff. We move on to the agenda. Apologies and changes to membership. We have apologies from Councillor Quigley, from Dave Adams, who is being replaced by Claire Christensen. Welcome, Claire. Councillor Medland hasn't apologised specifically for this meeting, but has indicated that he is unable to attend because of COVID in the family, and I'm willing to accept that as an apology. Minutes of the last meeting. Does anyone have any issues with the minutes of the last meeting? Would someone propose and second acceptance?
Seconded,
yeah.
Yes, it's fine. Right, so sure at the top right hand.
Where?
Initials. Yeah, initials, yeah.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Councillor Lilly, Michael.
I just, in regard to the item about climate change and strategy, I just wish to declare that I'm a trustee director of White Community Energy.
Okay, thank you. Any other declarations of interest not listed on people's declared interests? Thank you very much. Public question time. We have no written questions.
None notified, Chairman.
There is someone in the public gallery now. Welcome. Do you have a question to ask? Okay, thank you. Progress update. Receive an update on the progress against the outcomes arising from previous meetings and to provide an update to any outstanding actions. Councillor Paley.
Thank you. I'm quite disappointed we're now 10 months on since we were supposed to have had an update and a report back to this committee on the floating bridge. We are still in the dark. We should have had a report in January. Obviously, the cabinet member isn't here to answer the question on that and why we haven't had an update. Obviously, I know it's previously been mentioned there is an ongoing legal situation around that, but it would be good that even if just this committee privately could have an update on this, because we're now 10 months down the line and no update has been given to us or the town and parish council in East Cales, which of course affects daily. It would be good to have an update as a committee because we should have done.
I have heard a rumour that the discussions with the legal discussions have actually come to a result. It's only a rumour. I think it would be good for the committee to be updated on that. If it's commercially sensitive, then in a private session, but I think we should be updated on the current status of the floating bridge.
Chairman, what I can do arising from this meeting is to send an email to the cabinet member and the director concerned asking for an update.
Thank you. Anyone else got anything they wish to raise? I will raise the second item on the worksheet from 12th of July, provision of affordable housing, a report to be submitted to this committee. I don't think we've had an adequate report yet because nothing seems to be happening. I think we do need to have a report at the next meeting to update us on what is actually happening in terms of progress towards creating affordable housing.
Chairman, that item refers to the structure that you've asked for a report on.
Yeah.
Are you going wider than just the structure?
And so, yes, we asked for a structure of the housing department. We were told that there is someone being recruited full-time in a department under them. We've seen nothing of that to date. So maybe I would request that from the Chief Executive to be circulated to us.
Will do, Chairman.
Or an explanation as to why what we were promised hasn't happened.
Chair, if I may, there is in the cabinet papers for Thursday a report by Councillor Stevens on the up-to-date position with regard to housing, but it hasn't come before. That report hasn't come before us, as it were, but it is in the papers, and it does say, from my recollection of a fairly hasty read of them this morning, that someone has now been appointed as a director of housing.
So then we will be able to be supplied with that information. Okay. Moving on to forward plan. To identify any items contained in the council's forward plan which would benefit from early consideration by scrutiny, either before the cabinet makes the decision or to my supposed implementation, and should therefore be included in the committee's current work programme. The forward plan can be, well, got the online, you can view it.
Councillor Spink, Chairman. Councillor Spink.
So, Councillor Spink, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I've got a number of matters which I would appreciate being included on our agenda. One, unfortunately, is a matter which is due for decision by the Cabinet on the 10th of November, but it could still make it into our next meeting, and that's the adoption of the Newport Harbour Master Plan Supplementary Planning Document. It seems to me that's a significant document which corporate scrutiny ought to review. And then there is, bear with me a second, the quarterly performance monitoring report, again coming in on the 10th of November, which may come into our papers automatically, I'm not sure.
That will be an automatic agenda item, Chairman.
Thank you. And then on the forward plan, item number 12, appointment of chief executive, decision due on the 16th of November. I don't know if corporate scrutiny ought to be involved in that in any shape or form.
No, Chairman. You don't get involved in appointments of staff.
Okay, thank you. And then finally, items 17 and 18 on the forward plan, which are 17 is disposal of potential housing sites in East Cowes, decision due on the 12th of January, and 18 is to dispose of council-owned employment land at Kingston Marine Park, East Cowes, decision due on the 12th of January. It does seem to me, Chair, that disposal of council-owned land, when there is a policy, as I understand it, of prioritise council-owned land for the purposes of council-owned housing, ought to be subject to corporate scrutiny.
Don't you, Chairman? We can add those to the work plan. That's
in advance of the decision due date, which is the 12th of January.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is everyone happy with that? Yeah. Thank you. Committee's work programme. Oh, sorry, Michael. Councillor Lilly.
Just on the forward plan, one or two comments on the item on page 16, which is the Isle of Wight Domestic Abuse Sexual Violence Commission. It is important to note that is Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October. My question is twice a year we normally get a report regarding from the Community Safety Partnership, and normally then domestic comes under that. When is our next meeting due for our presentation regarding that?
That'll be next month's committee, Chairman. Yeah.
The other question was, I had requested at previous meetings about, from a corporate scrutiny point of view, the review of the public health partnership with Hampshire. It's dated down. Will that be on our agenda at the next meeting?
Chairman, the public health item at the December meeting of the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Health and Social Care, that committee will be looking at the LGA peer review, which will have implications for the partnership arrangements. And the chair of that committee has asked if that can be taken first before any further considerations given to the partnership arrangement.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is to do with White Care. I know that obviously White Care will come under the Policy and Scrutiny of Health, right? But it is, I think it has relevance to corporate scrutiny in the sense it is an extremely important part of our commercialisation and because it provides an income. And I think it's extremely important that we do have an opportunity to talk about it at corporate scrutiny.
Chairman, there is already an item in the work plan for the committee to consider both the White Care options review and also the function of bereavement services business model as part of the commercialisation.
Yeah, thank you.
Any more questions, issues? If we move on to the freedom of information report.
Chairman, you've just got agenda item 6B, which is your actual work programme. And I think we've discussed some issues that will be inserted in there. And in terms of agenda management, we'll make sure that obviously the agenda is not overloaded. I am having discussions with Councillor Quigley on the 8th of November agenda because it's getting quite heavy. And we're seeing if things can be slipped or dealt with by other means. But also as part of the work programme, if members go to page 27, which is Appendix 1, that's the work plan scoping document on the issue that the committee has previously identified that they wish to have included in their work plan in regard to the council's performance management framework. And in accordance with the process of the committee, what we'd like to do is for members to sign off, this is the key line of inquiry for that particular item with the expected outcomes. Then that gets reported over to the relevant cabinet member and director. It gives them a framework of what should be contained in the report. So if members are happy with the details shown on Appendix 1, page 22, we can get that form put in the work plan and get work underway on that.
Does someone like to move acceptance? That work schedule? Fine. Those in favour? Thank you very much. Now we move on to freedom of information.
Sorry, can I just raise? I mean, obviously on the work programme, important one, which is for November, is the impact of cost of living crisis. It is sad that due to time restraints, we were not able to have at full council a full discussion about the cost of living crisis. And I think it's extremely important that we do have that discussion at the next scrutiny, because I think that links into the cabinet, but also the next full council meeting, because we as a council right across the country have debated about the cost of living crisis and have clarified a programme of action they're taking. And this needs to be, done by the whole council and through our processes. So from a scrutiny point of view, I just think we need to really make sure that we have that debate about the impact of cost of living at our next meeting in November. Because otherwise, we're in December and, people are being hit now. It was just a real sadness we did not have that debate last meeting.
Okay. I will move on to the freedom of information report then. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for a very comprehensive report. Very much appreciated. Does anyone have any questions on the report, comments? Michael?
Bound to be, isn't it? This is sort of more of a puzzling question, really, right? Because my logic is when it sort of comes to a resident actually requesting an FOI, to me, something's gone wrong, right? Because in a way, a question, unless it's someone who just puts an FI and doesn't ask the question, I presume they have asked the question, they haven't had satisfactory answers, and that's why they've gone for an FOI. It seems to me it's last resort, right? Request. And I was just going to say, how do we prevent people getting to the stage of an FOI?
Councillor Bacon, would you like to speak?
I'm sure I will hand over to Justin Thorne for part of the answer, but it's an interesting point you raise and one that I have discussed with legal officers, because I think there's something of a culture of requesting things by FOI. I'm sure we all have residents who ask us lots of questions. I have one in particular who will ask me a question and says, and this is an FOI, almost cut and pasted into everything he sends me, which I always answer in time, of course. But as to whether there's a well, as I say, I think there's a culture in some quarters. I think one can ask if something has gone wrong, and I suspect that comes down very often to simply the question of resources and time to turn things round. And we possibly ought not to forget that. You also have to have regard to some of the reasons that FOIs are asked more uncommon, well, not so much uncommonly, but differently. And certainly, if you've had connection with the media, you will know that on a slow news day, what a journalist will do is cook up FOI requests and send them out. And they have to be treated just like any other. And very often it's difficult to tell whether something is a genuine FOI request, a request born of someone not knowing the system and jumping straight to it, or, as I say, someone just as part of their job trying to find information. So I'm not giving a very clear answer, I know, but I suppose part of the problem is actually knowing what is behind the requests. And that's why I mentioned the media, because very often you don't do that. So you don't know if there is a problem. I think we can assume that there is probably a element of resources behind some of this. But I'll probably turn to Mr. Thorne now to see if he can actually add anything a little more coherent to what I've said.
I think one of the issues is that Justin, do you want to add? Off you go.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not suggesting FOIs don't arise as a result of residents finding it's a last resort, but then that may be for genuine reasons where there is concern as to release of the information. So if the council receives a request where there is some concern that one of the limited exemptions might apply, and that's rare, given the numbers, then we would automatically treat it as an FOI. However, we don't log business as usual requests. They are processed as a matter of normal. So the normal inquiry that can be answered straight away will be dealt with as a business as usual and is not logged as a FOI. I also think we've got to be mindful, and something the cabinet member alluded to, that not all requests are from residents. We don't ask for who they represent, whether they're an action on their own behalf or for a media or a business, but it's fair to assume a high proportion of those requests do come from the media or businesses, etc., where there may be a genuine reason. And I also think that people are aware of their rights now and feel that they need to put FOI for whatever reason, whether that's an experience not necessarily with this council, but with other organisations, they automatically title it FOI. And in accordance with our policy and ICO guidance, if they title it FOI, we need to treat it as an FOI.
The fact that,
Sorry, can I ask a supplementary to that?
yeah, give my reply and then you can have your supplementary. One of the issues is that it's a statutory obligation, and therefore, if you go, some people may just jump in because they know they will get an answer if they ask an FOI, and why go through the stages beforehand? Your supplementary.
Councillor Lilly.
A lot of the inquiries are not actually recorded. Wouldn't it actually be quite good if we did actually record the questions and the inquiries, because actually that would give a better understanding that we would know that a whole lot of questions had been answered and you'd given answered and the person was satisfied, right? Against the FOI, where perhaps people are not so satisfied. I just think perhaps you're missing a trick there, that actually that happens every day, isn't it? A lot of people are being satisfied with answers they're getting, and we should actually be recording that so that we can balance that to the people who are not. That actually gives us quite important data within that. So I just.
Can I just
my question?
Could I just clarify? The suggestion is that every time an officer answers a question, responds to an email, and doesn't get a reply back saying I'm not satisfied, that all those, that should be separately recorded as well as doing the piece of work separate, answering the email. Because that's quite a resource implication.
No, but
I'm not quite sure what you're suggesting, Councillor.
What I'm saying is if we know and we've got data that we've had certain, people have not been happy, they've decided to go through FOI to get further information. Actually, aren't we missing a trick that if actually people are getting answers, right? Shouldn't we actually not know the detail of that, but 500 questions were answered and 500 questions were asked and 500 answers were given, right? I don't think that is necessarily. I worked in an organisation that was giving out information all the time, and we actually recorded that we had answered that question.
Do you mean answered as an FOI or just answered generally in the day-to-day course of business? That's a bit I'm not understanding.
What Justin said was they don't record, am I correct, Justin, that you're actually getting lots of questions, right, generally about things, but you don't actually record the number of questions you've been asked and answers you have given. And I was just saying, how do you know that you've actually done right?
Chair, I'm not sure a general question and answer session for Councillor Lilly is getting us very far. I think he's looking for a problem that doesn't exist. He can't possibly be suggesting that every time an officer answers somebody a question, they have to log it. I mean, that's plainly nonsense and not living in the real world.
I think the cabinet member has.
Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Lilly, well, no, it's a good point you make, because if the question is is the fact of a question that's treated as an FOI recorded, and the fact and answer given, is that recorded, then I think the answer is yes, and hence the statistics we've got in the report. And perhaps what would assist is to have some sort of general reporting, perhaps in the quarterly reports, of numbers of requests received and responded to. And I think that would be perfectly possible. In fact, I think it possibly used to happen. I know we cut down the some of the KPIs a few years ago, and I don't see that being a particular issue with bringing that back in. I'm sensing that's what you're really asking. It's not a question about every officer who answers an email being requested to record that. So the short answer is I believe it used to be done, and I don't see why it couldn't be done. My only point or query would be to make sure that any measure that is reported is a meaningful one. So simply to say number of requests received tells us very little in itself. It would need to be balanced with numbers of answers given and whether there was any follow-up, something like that. And that information is essentially how this report before you is made up. And we're getting it in a form for this meeting, but if the question is, could that be some sort of regular exercise, I don't see there being a particular issue with that, and I'm seeing accordance from behind me.
Well, thank you.
I think Paul.
Chair, can I apologise for my frustration?
Apology accepted. Paul has some information that may clarify this. Then I've got Claire and.
I know that what the cabinet member was saying was correct. It used to be in the quarterly performance. I think it was adherence with the statutory requirements of replying to freedom of information requests, but that unfortunately, due to some changes, has slipped from the reporting mechanism to cabinet. I think what's being suggested here and now is that perhaps you reinvestigate including that in the quarterly performance, and also notice the sort of the dissatisfaction with the responses. I think that's what is also being said, that if people aren't satisfied with the response under freedom of information, that perhaps that be separately recorded as part of that exercise. But perhaps, obviously, if we make the request, Chairman, to the cabinet member and the appropriate director, they can go away and have a look at that and come back to what is actually achievable within the resources available.
It is important because it is a statutory requirement for us to achieve levels of quality in this area. Therefore, it should be coming back routinely to cabinet, and if it's coming to cabinet, it'll come here as well, so that we can actually wash it. Councillor Christensen, Claire.
Thank you, Chair. I think I was just going to clarify that as well, that I thought that we used to have that kind of data. So it's the business as usual data that I think we're interested in this bit, on top of the other data, to see if there's any areas where we could identify that there is potentially a problem. But you're managing it through FOI, but giving out that information as a business as usual kind of data, and seeing if people are coming through that particular avenue rather than going to councillors or staff in the first instance, so that we can actually see that. And that's how I understood it. So I just thought if we could have that data, it'd be very helpful. Thank you.
Councillor Robertson, Joe.
No, nothing to add in particular. I'm still not sure I understand the different categories of question here. It's either an FOI or it's not. And if it's not, it's still a question. So are we therefore saying it should be recorded as a question? And I mean, I'm not quite, if it's not FOI being recorded, what are we talking about being recorded that's not already being recorded?
As I understand it, we're not. I thought, because that would just be silly. We're talking about those things that are received as or have to be treated as FOIs being not so much recorded, because they are, but the data about that being regularly published.
Councillor Paling.
Councillor Paling, Councillor Drew.
It's just a question on the response time, obviously meeting those targets, and is there a plan in place to get responses back to those that have been asking the questions higher? Obviously, I've noticed that last year it was obviously 89%. The highest the council had was in 2018 when it was 93%. is there an action plan in place to try and get more responses back to people on time? As obviously it is a statutory obligation of the council, it's important that the public, when they are putting in the FOIs through the FOI process, are getting their responses back within the time frame they should be. Because as well, town and parish councils too do ask FOI requests. I know our town and parish council have several times, as it's just a far more direct way to get the detailed information that we're asking for.
So you ask things as an FOI as a matter of course.
Regularly, yeah. That's
part of the problem, isn't
but as do individuals, because previously there hasn't been the faith within the system. So you go to a direct point that the council has to respond to with the detailed question that you've got, and it has been a reliable way to get the information that we've requested.
I think there's a wider question there about developing faith, which is probably not for us to get into today. It's certainly an aim. Whether there's a specific action plan at the moment, I'm not sure. Action, what you call an action plan, just Mr. Thorne.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the trouble is there's 2 or 3 different things, and probably more actually, that can affect the response time. So, as you note from the report, we have a corporate team that provide corporate support, but the actual FOIs are managed by the services. And as with any other task in the service, that can be impacted by particular service peaks, or one of the big impacts can be if the network of digs that are set out within the report, if we have one leave and we then are recruiting, the way the recruitment process works, you don't always get that dovetailed together. And then we need to train that dig up, there can be a slight delay, and that can affect service delivery, including FOI stats. So, no, I mean, we don't have a specific action plan. We do monitor the stats that you've just been talking about, we still produce at a service level. And where we can see a dip in individual areas' performance, we seek to intervene and find out why. And quite often that's normally either particular peaks in service delivery, as in their normal service areas, or it's about staff absences or vacancies.
Thank you. Councillor Drew. Well,
thank you, Chair. I was just wondering whether there was any approximate data kept on the average person hours which are expended on dealing with an FOI request. I think, as Councillor Bacon has alluded to, some people will make these requests as a matter of course, and that's absolutely fine. And I think clearly it's an important statutory regime, but I think potentially it might be helpful if we can look at ways of showing people the potential cost implications, whether there's an alternative, and the actual granular detail of how much that's placing on the council in terms of cost. So I guess my question is there that information, and if not, is that something we could approximate without too much of a burden? Thank you.
I think for my part, I would say if you look at Appendix 1, which is a snapshot sample of requests, you can see that they come in very many forms and sizes, and I'm not sure an average would be particularly a meaningful measure, or if one could come up with an average, whether it would help us a great deal. To say some of these requests are a couple of lines, if that, some are itemized several points, 8, 9, 10 points, all set out separate, but all part of one request. That would be my thought, but again, perhaps I'd turn to Mr. Thorne for any additional thoughts on the operational side of things.
Yeah, please go ahead, John.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I entirely agree with the Cabinet member in terms of generally what the average time it takes for FOI requests. I mean, to state the obvious, some will be very, very quick, but because they've mentioned FOI, it'll be treated as an FOI and recorded, but it will be a very quick turnaround. Some are a little bit longer. However, those where there is a reasonable belief that it will exceed the cost cap limit, so it might exceed £450 based upon statutory hourly charge of £25 per hour, which essentially works out at 18 hours worth of officer time, we do record, because then the authority has the discretion to either refuse a request or ask the requester to reframe it or charge for it. Now, those are normally apparent from the start. It's either a vast amount of questions, 200 or 300 questions within a document, or it's an incredibly complicated series of questions. And at that point, we would make an approximation of how long it would take. It would be above 8.5 hours, and we would therefore ask them to reframe their request and give them suggestions as part of our advice and assistance duty as to how they might reduce it down under the limit.
Councillor Lever, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. Some part of my question was already asked and answered, so that's good. I was going to request, similarly to what Councillor Drew was talking about, with the individual services, if we have the data split for those services, just so we can understand better, perhaps which services are more under the cosh, for lack of a better word, than others. Have I said something funny?
So no, it's just your phraseology. You know, who are the good responders and who are the bad responders is what you're asking, basically, isn't it? Yeah, I don't see why that can't be done.
Yes, but well, we can, and we do monitor individual areas and service areas. The only slight caveat I put to that is because of a slight limitation on our CRM reporting. It doesn't have every single service assigned to its own service name, and therefore we end up with a miscellaneous box at the end for those services. For some reason, technically, they don't appear under legal services or adults or etc. So yes, we can, and we do report that, subject to this slight technical limitation where there are some services that for some reason are categorized as miscellaneous. Not deliberately, not because they are miscellaneous services, it's just they happen to be had the wrong box ticked. I don't know why it is, but yes, we can report that.
Just one other question from me. Do we ever see patterns of requests for particular types of information? And if so, is someone looking at that? And is it the sort of thing we could incorporate into the website, as we are working on the website now? Anyone?
Well, I think you obviously do get patterns, because sometimes issues are very prevalent in the public's mind and they ask questions about them. In terms of the second part of the question, again, I would have to defer to Mr. Thornwell.
Thank you, Chair. So our access to information policy says that we'll start from the presumption of making information available, and we would encourage, from a corporate support point of view, service to publish as much as possible on the website, because that reduces the number of FOI requests. I think Councillor Bacon's right that if there is a controversial issue, we would normally see a spike in that particular area because more people will make requests. But our advice to services is, if you are getting requests for information on a routine basis, publish it, because technically there is then an exemption from FOI because it's already published. So that is our advice to services. And you know, as the website project is rolled out, that we are continuing advice to populate it with as much as possible that is routinely asked for, and that would be in the public interest.
Thank you. Are members happy to note that report with thanks?
Chairman, just on the point that Councillor Lever was on about the individual service areas, is that something that you would want to see some information on, if we could have a sample of what it may look like, so that then you can see if you want to have that as a future regular monitoring update?
I think it'd be good, helpful at least, because certainly for my interest, it was just, I'm sure some services struggle with more FOIs than others. So, and obviously, as Councillor Bacon alluded to, certain events on the island will spike that at times. But if there's a picture, a general picture of which departments, services, have more FOI requests, then it just gives you an idea of where we maybe need to target some of our attention, like some of the other councillors have mentioned about. Can councillors help alleviate some of that ourselves, and where we can help a hand?
Could I suggest you'd probably need a little bit of a lead-in period of that, because there will be some departments, just because of size, quantity of work, quantity of public-facing work, who will have more requests, just because that's the way the world works. And one needs to probably find a baseline first and then look for peaks and troughs, unusual activity to make that exercise a valuable one. But once one has the baseline, which I assume a bit of work would have to go into get that initial baseline, or at least just to compile what one would expect, and then you have something to measure it against. I'm always someone who, it's fine to have figures, but unless you've got some comparator, some baseline, some way to make those figures reasonable and mean something, then data needs to have a purpose and a measuring stick to make it valuable.
We go back to, I'll be happy to note with thanks. Yeah, move on. Yeah, thank you very much. If we move on to the next agenda item, procurement strategy. Just before we start, my recollection is that this comes under Councillor Jarman's area, not under yours.
It used to. But following the reshuffle, it's now under me. Hence the reason I'm here and he's not.
I understand you're here. It's just I wasn't aware that those tasks have been reshuffled in the Constitution. Would you like to present?
Oh, well, yes, well, this is coming before Cabinet on Thursday. A lot of work has gone into development of the strategy. I wouldn't say too much in introduction. Obviously, the papers are there in the Cabinet bundle. I'm sure they've been read, and hopefully they've been read with interest. It is a strategy, so it's not the detailed rules. The detailed rules will follow on, and you'll see throughout the document target dates for development of various documentation, policy, etc., to follow on from the basic strategy. I would obviously highlight that we have two key elements of the four principal themes, two key elements appearing at positions number 1, number 2, local community wealth building and climate and environment. And particularly perhaps of interest is local community wealth building, which you'll see the concept, for want of a better term, set out at page 5 on the document, and really to try and ensure that procurement works to favour local communities and local businesses. That is a key aim. And as the commentary after the 5 pillars says on page 5, as I say, the strategy shall embed local community wealth building into the council's procurement processes, and commissioners shall be required to consider how their contracts can encourage as much money as possible to remain within the local economy for the benefit of local communities. That's the aim. It won't always be accorded with because the various things one is procuring and the various requirements that one will have. But I think it is key that that is now one of the leading principle that forms this strategy. So otherwise, the paper is there. I have Hayley, the officer, has put in a hell of a lot of work in this and deserves praise for the hours she spent on it. But we are ready to answer questions if there are any.
I'll start with a question this time. You've got the headlines on page 5 or page 57, and on page 73 or page 19, depending on what set of numbers you're using, we actually say that value for money is really important. But it's not in our front page when we say what are the really important things. And I do think that you should have value for money up there with the other 4 on page 5.
Page 5 merely lists the element of local community wealth building. The actual 4 principal themes are set out on page 3, and that includes commercial approach, as you'll see there. There are the 4 themes: local community wealth building, climate and environment, commercial approach, and skills and capabilities. And then each is dealt with in turn. Page 5 is the introductory section to the first of the 4 themes, but not encapsulating all 4 themes.
when you're encapsulating your strategy, one of the key elements of it should be there, and the value for money has to be a key element of any strategy for in this area.
Thank you. I wish to welcome this because I think it does outline some very important areas. And thank you for all your hard work in putting this together. Because I think as an island, it's very important that we, through our contracts, do actually get that movement into our local economy. It's very interesting that we have one of the world's leading organisations through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the circular economy. And I think this particularly helps put the foundations within our procurement strategy of the circular economy, because it's actually very, very important to this island that as much of our money is kept and the wholes of the sieve are produced. And I think this starts to clearly have that and harness that. You often use the word harness in the document because that's very, very important. And it also recognises the range of, the developing and growing of small enterprises, community organisations, cooperatives, and the range of organisations within our community. And I think that it says here, locking wealth in place. And I think as an island, that's very, very important because in other areas, you can be in a bigger county and move in. Once it's gone off the island, it's not necessarily going to come back. And so I think that's very important. And I think that it, the socially productive use of land and property, I think it creates a message that will be part of the documents that go to people who are providing services we're procuring, that they have to take an interest in the island and in this community. And I think that is very important because that hasn't always happened. And I'm sure we can know lots of personal examples of that. I think it's very, very important that we, in all that we do, is we get a dialogue with the people, the contractors, the people supplying services, so that they are working with us for the benefit of the wider community. That might be in targeting some of the jobs within a contract to local people in a particular area. It might be making sure that in their supply chain, they are looking at local companies to supply in that chain. So I wish to welcome it. I think it is a very good tool within our kit to get the best we can out of our procurement within that. And I think there are certain areas, particularly I think in adult social care and some areas where we, are forced in market, as it were, to actually just get a service, let alone the service we want to. So good. And the last point I would like to say is it is great to see this document updated with the climate and the environment, because I think a lot of our procurement documentation apart hasn't been as emphatic as I think it's needed to be, and I think it is very emphatic in that. So I welcome it. Thank you.
Any more comments, questions? I personally am happy to support this, but I would like to see the value for money bought right up front with the other criteria, but are people happy to support?
Councillor Quirk, can I just say, I'm just looking over it again. I do take your point. I mean, good value is mentioned in the first paragraph, but I'm sure that that can be underlined, put in bold, because you're right, it is a key feature. And so I'll happily undertake to just look at the introduction again, just to telegraph that that is one of the key principles, along with you know, the consultation, the GDPR, health and safety, and so on, that appear in the document. But it's a well-made point, and I take it.
Otherwise, I think it's a really good document. Thank you.
I wish to recommend it, or what do we do?
You can agree to formally support it.
I propose we formally support it.
Yeah, everyone happy with that? Anyone can second it.
Yeah.
You have our support. Responding to climate change and enhancing the biosphere. Councillor Bacon, Jonathan, do you want to say something first, or do we just go into questions?
Again, I'll speak very briefly. Obviously, what we have here is essentially an update report on work that stretches back to 2019, when Councillor Lilly brought a motion to the council, which was accepted by most present, to declare a climate emergency back in 2019. And obviously in parallel with that, I think it was a few months before, the island was awarded the UNESCO designation of being a biosphere. Things moved a little bit slowly, I think, at first. Of course, we had a pandemic, we know that. But in the last year, 18 months, a lot of work has been done. We now have a climate change strategy. We're working to bring together the support mechanisms for that, for our Mission Zero project, and indeed for support of the biosphere, as detailed in paragraph 13 of the report, where we have a revised structure as to how that is to be monitored, encouraged, fed into by the hubs and the steering groups. And of course, we're advertising still for membership Biosphere steering group at the moment. So an awful lot has been done, and what we tried to do in this report is to reflect that background, but also set out where we are, but where we're going, what work is in progress, what we're hoping to do, and all towards embedding the climate change strategy and the principles of the biosphere, obviously illustrated by the UNESCO 17 Sustainable Goals, and to get that embedded into the way the council and indeed the island operates. And I suppose the only thing I'd like to add is that I think some of this work is, the need for it is sharpened by the fact that we are in an energy crisis at the moment. There's no getting away from it. But a lot of the work in relation to Mission Zero and climate change is pertinent and relevant to dealing in the long term with some of the problems we face in the energy market and more widely. So that would be my very brief overview introduction. I'm not sure if I have an officer online to support or answer any technical questions, but I will certainly do my best should there be any questions forthcoming.
I have Councillor Robertson, Councillor Lilly, and Councillor Paling in that order so far. Councillor Robertson.
Sorry, can I just make a particular, not correction, but a particular point? You mentioned about me bringing forward the climate emergency, which triggered that. Thank you for that. But I wish to actually compliment someone else. Councillor Steve Hastings, who's sadly resigning from this council. If it wasn't without him and myself working, Councillor Quirk will know that, very hard to actually get through that strategy. And it was elements right across party that actually got that through. And I wish to publicly acknowledge that Councillor Hastings was very much part of that. And he also instigated the Sustainability Forum that actually is still in operation today and brings all the kind of green, eco, environment partners together on a very well basis. So I would like that to acknowledge, because if we hadn't had that partnership between myself and Councillor Stevens, we wouldn't have actually got that through, and all the groundwork that officers have done to actually get to this situation. So I'd like that properly recorded. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. I would totally endorse that as well. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. The content of this paper looks good, and it's obviously vitally important in terms of subject matter, and I'm interested to hear Councillor Lilly talk about cross-party working, which is good. My concern is at the bottom of page 82. I'm not sure the leader of this council was straight with me when I asked her a question about upgrading the heating system and the windows of this building in County Hall. When I asked her at full council about the money that was being spent, she said it was a grant, and the deputy leader didn't dispute that. What we see in this box on page 82 is in fact £600,000 or up to £600,000 of council funds will also be spent on upgrading the heating system and the windows to County Hall, as well as £700,000 in grant money. So a total of £1.3 million. The council's contribution of 600,000 wasn't mentioned in a recent press release from the council, which I also find concerning, possibly misleading. I think probably misleading for those who read it. So my question is this: does the cabinet member not share my concern that spending £1.3 million on a heating system and new windows in a building that may not have much life left in it is troubling?
Thank you. I'm not sure the premise of the question, because I'm not aware of any immediate plans to demolish County Hall.
I'm happy to clarify why I've said that. The cabinet of this council agreed to incorporate a change to the draft island planning strategy, which included a feasibility study into bringing forward possibly development land around County Hall, including the building, the car park, the police station. That feasibility study could recommend pulling down part of County Hall, and it might be something certainly I would advocate, but it could recommend that. So it is possible this building hasn't got a huge amount of time left. And I think on a contingency basis, 1.3 million seems an awful lot of money to invest in this building. I mean, the building's half empty, probably more than half empty. I think there's a huge question mark over its future. That is a lot of money to spend, especially at this time when families are facing a crisis in their own household finances.
Well, I repeat my earlier comment. As I say, I think it's probably better that I get a written answer to you about that. Or I would turn to an officer if we had further information about the terms of grant. I don't know if there's match funding, anything like that. But as I say, as things stand, County Hall exists. We need to make sure it is as green and functional as possible. If it is, I don't really know what the timescale for the feasibility study, what it might suggest is. We're dealing with some very nebulous thoughts. in this, so perhaps a bit more detail would help to understand the premise of the question, as I say, and also, as I say, I'll probably look to an officer to just clarify the terms of what we are doing with the money we've been granted and what terms might apply to that, which I don't know off the top of my head, but may be pertinent.
Thank you. You'll know more than anyone, Councillor Bacon, that particularly on climate change, the public need to be brought with decision makers. And I just would also add that that sort of expenditure the public will worry about, and I'd be concerned if it led to more negative views about expenditure in other areas to deliver carbon net zero, because hearts and minds do need to be won over on climate change expenditure. And I do think that is a concerning figure. And I take your point that that there are no guarantees that County Hall will be pulled down, but I think that is a very good reason to challenge 1.3 million, which now seems to be allocated and going ahead. I take the point on grant money as well, but I do wonder whether the council hasn't got other buildings or other ways it could spend that grant money more efficiently on buildings or facilities that have a guaranteed future, unlike this building. But if we don't know the terms of the grant, then obviously we're not going to get further on that in this room.
I take the point, but I don't think one can say this building has a guaranteed end either. But I'm sure, Councillor Robertson, you would support the sort of expenditure there for buildings that are to continue, because these are exactly the sort of things people should be doing in terms of improving the carbon quality, if I can put it like that, of buildings by installing much more appropriate and sustainable heating units, lighting units, and so on. Certainly no one is going to do that or should do that in a building that has a known short life, but that's not the situation we're dealing with. So as I say, I'm sure that for buildings that are to be used and do have a life, I take it that you do support things such as heat pumps, LED lighting, etc., and improved insulation.
Yes, I do, but not on a building where there isn't the certainty over its future. But yes, I do support those provisions in buildings that are secure.
Councillor Michael.
Before I go into my main point, just to make a comment, the Isle of Wight Council is an employer, and whether staff are in this building or they're working, there are staff in this building, and as an employer, we have to make, we legally are responsible to make sure that our staff have a heated building, of that all employers have to provide that level. So until we make the decision on the building, we have a legal responsibility to make sure the people in the building, our employees, have adequate heating. But that's just a comment. The overall on the strategy, which I welcome and will propose that this committee accepts it. The particular question I suppose I have in mind is a study was done some years ago, about 2017, by the European Green Foundation on the island on how many jobs could be created through the green sector. We obviously want to cope with climate change. We obviously want to reduce our, energy, our carbon footprint. But we as an island could actually be creating jobs in producing energy and producing all the kind of industries that go with it. A good example is Vestas, that builds the biggest blades in the world and has actually got a big order book and within that. And actually that report by the European Green Foundation said that we could actually create new jobs of over 2,500 jobs. As you know, I've always been a a campaigner for the Nicholson Road site to be an eco business centre, because I do feel that we have a real opportunity, and particularly with the engineering skills that we've got within that. And my second part was one question was, how do you see the job creation of green jobs of that? And very much pioneered by someone called Dave Green, who was the sort of founder of Eco Island of that many years ago. Obviously, he sadly died. But there has always been a vision on the island that we could really be a centre of excellence for the renewable energy and green sector. And I would like to see that vision. My also bit is that this island clearly could produce renewable energy. We know that we've now got PTEC, that tidal, we know solar, but our problem on the island is the fact that we have a redundant power station that takes a whole cable, and we have 2 other cables. I know recently our leader did, which was reported at full council, talk to the CEO of Ofgem, but I would like to see what is the vision of actually getting the cables so that we could be exporting much more. Because at the moment, a lot of our solar is just turned off at night, where actually it could be actually going into the grid. We could become self-sufficient on renewable energy on this island if we had the means to do it. We've got the sun and we've got the tidal, and a bit of controversy on the wind, but we could also do it on wind as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lilly. There's an awful lot in there, and I think in part you answered some of the questions about developing a vision. Well, there definitely is that vision. It has to be part of Mission Zero and the wider objectives of supporting the UNESCO Sustainable Goals. There's no point trying to develop these things unless you develop the skills and expertise that feeds those and feeds into them, whether it's something as simple as how to insulate your home, or a full retrofit, or developing wind turbines, tidal power, and so on. And I can but agree with you that we have so much potential here to do all those things and become a market leader, a world leader in achieving all those. And that's certainly the vision I have, and I would like to see brought to fruition through Mission Zero, through sustaining our biosphere. Part of that is having the appropriate infrastructure and environment, infrastructure environment in which that can be achieved. And yes, we certainly recall what the leader said at full council last week. We have a problem in terms of what we can, in terms of generating renewable energy, as to what to do with it, because we are limited in our connection to the mainland. We have 3 cables, being very simplistic about it. One of those has to be a backup. That must always be the case, but one of them is reserved for the use of a power station that operates for a few hours a year and does not serve the island in any way at all. It provides power the few times it is called on during a year to the mainland. And that is an awful situation, because if that cable were available, then it's not quite a halt, but the slowdown in the development of solar farms and other renewable sources of energy would disappear, and we would have a lot more capacity to generate the energy we need, and as you say, then export energy. So it is very heartening that Laura, when speaking to relevant industry people at the conference the other week in Orkney, made that point and got an immediate response. And we know that we are going to be, I think they're coming here, aren't they? Ofgem are coming here to discuss that very issue. Which is great, because that has been a bugbear for a long time. And I think when people find out the situation in relation to the power station, they are shocked. It is shocking. And the effect it is having on slowing down what we could do on the island is worrying. So if we can deal with that, which is a priority, so much the better. Sorry, you've got me on a bit of a hobby horse now. So I hope that answers your question. Certainly the vision, I think, is clear, and that vision must be followed through by developing our market, our knowledge, our jobs market in a way that serves what we need to do and what will serve the energy sector, home energy, etc. in the future. And part of that vision and that work, in addition to the green sector jobs, is ensuring that infrastructure. And I think that's probably the connecting cable, the key thing that needs to be dealt with, because it would unlock so much, I was going to say potential, it's more than potential, it would just actually enable things to happen that could have happened years ago and have not been able to, because of that block on our ability to export energy. It's thrown us back onto the ideas of developing much more battery storage, and there's no harm in that. There's great potential from the simplest of things, increased use of electric vehicles. They are batteries on wheels, essentially. Connect those to your house, the power can go either way. And that is technology that is carrying on developing in any event. But the boost to what we could do of having the better connection with the mainland would be so much more than that and so valuable.
Cameron and then Peter.
Just a question. So on point 5, on the first page of the report, it says about working closely with town, parish and community councils to support them. What support is envisaged here? Is that financial support for town and parish councils, access and support to get grants? I know us in East Cowes are looking for grants to get an electric bike for our staff to use whilst doing council business. Is it staff availability to support the projects? What is envisaged when it says to support delivering these aspirations?
Potentially all of those. It's one of the statements in the corporate plan that was adopted last year, which is that it's not a commitment that just applies to development of our climate change strategy and our status as a biosphere. It is a general commitment, and in a way, I wouldn't want to restrict it by saying it will be done in this way, because there may be new and innovative ways out there that parish councils may come and make suggestion. We've certainly spoken to IWOC and ideas that they're developing, and there's suggestion. Networking is one of those ways. I'm not sure you mentioned, because we know that Ventnor Town Council have come up with some very interesting schemes and ideas, and have proposed that each town and parish council and community council should just come up with 3 ways of reducing their carbon footprint, which is an excellent suggestion. It's not too restrictive, because there are big places like Ryde that could maybe do a whole list of things. There are smaller places like St Helens, like Rookley, who have a small budget, not much of a carbon footprint, but could still look at little things, and every little helps, as the saying goes. So I'm not going to restrict it by saying there are specific methodologies envisaged. It will be what is appropriate, but acting as a network, acting as a source of advice. Financial is always the bugbear, but part of what we have in the structure that's set out on page 81, paragraph 13 of the report, we have the steering group, steering committee, and the hubs there. And as you'll see referenced in the text, some of those and the work they're doing, they're racing ahead and they're already looking at ways to secure monies, funds, grants, whatever. And if they can do that, that's potentially something. It could be fed down to the town and parish councils. So I think the short answer is all options open.
Thank you. Councillor Speak, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bacon, thank you for your report. At the beginning of this meeting, I asked for one of the matters to come before Cabinet, to come on to the work plan of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee, and that was the proposed disposal, to consider disposing of council-owned employment land at Kingston Marine Park in East Cowes. And I noticed, and in fact I hadn't noticed it when I asked for that to come in onto the work plan of corporate scrutiny, but I noticed that that site, at page 89 now of your report, is being considered also as for battery storage. Is there, I don't say this as by way of criticism because it's a large topic, but is there a possibility there of right hand not knowing what left hand is doing? And can we rest assured, as it were, that this proposal for battery storage won't be thwarted by the Cabinet decision possibly to dispose of the land? I don't know anything about the detail of the possible disposal of the land because I haven't seen any papers yet.
You're right, it will not be thwarted in any way. You'll see the commitment is investigating council-owned site. There is an example given that Kingston, if it were to remain in council ownership and no decisions being made yet that I'm aware of, then that is the sort of location that could be used, but the commitment is not site specific. So it is still an aim. And as I said, when I went off on one earlier, battery storage is an important part of developing our renewable energy base and our sustainability, whether it be a large single unit that can store large amounts of power, or smaller units, whether it be cars or smaller community-based battery units, whatever they might be, across the island. So there's no suggestion of thwarting here. The use of battery storage is key to taking forward a renewable energy strategy, and that's why it is a general aim. And as I say, it's not a site-specific aim in the bold title.
Thank you. It's just that if I mean, there's only so much land and so many opportunities, and if the concept is that it's council-owned land, which would be appropriate for battery storage, the loss of a site-specific site-specific opportunity at Kingston would be a great shame if perhaps the Cabinet decision isn't linked into the decision also of keeping, excuse me, keeping the marine park for battery storage. That's the point that I'm really concerned about.
And it's a fair point, and one that will be part of any consideration, I'm sure. But I don't think I can add anything more to that. The overarching aim is to have a site for battery storage. But this is, I suppose I should say, this is an organic document, and things are changing, developing day by day. And of course, if we do pursue successfully the creation of a better connection with the mainland, then the priorities in terms of battery may become less, the need may become less. So, you know, we're not going to pin ourselves to the wall on any particular location or aim with these things. It's part of a bigger picture. But I take your point.
Councillor Richardson. Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Bacon, do we have an update on the Biosphere Steering Committee and how the volunteers for that, and how whether it will help make it more visible and relevant in the community and help public understand the purpose of the biosphere status? Will that kind of help with that, facilitating that issue, and generally how has that gone? Because that's kind of made it visible. I've seen it in the press, asking for volunteers, asking people to be more involved. So do we have an update? Thank you.
It's ongoing. I probably can't say too much because the applications are still open. So if anyone is interested, whether in the room or out in the wider world, the application process is open until this Friday. And you'll see where the steering committee sits in the organisational structure. It is going to be very much a strategic lead to support and develop the aims of the biosphere and that integration I was talking about earlier. But part of that is going to be the communication and education. An awful lot of what needs to be done in terms of taking things forward is developing public understanding. I think a lot has changed in terms of public perception and understanding in the last 2 or 3 years. I do think we've crossed the brow of the hill to some extent, but that does not mean that there's not an awful lot to be done. And the Biosphere Steering Committee, allied with the Mission Zero project, is part of that informative process, educative process, whether it be at high level or the sort of things that Ventnor Town Council is doing. It's all part of developing understanding, knowledge people have as to what they should do, what they can do, what is practical, what is affordable, and the Biosphere Steering Committee and indeed the Mission Zero Community Hub Steering Group are key elements of giving the strategic lead for that process.
Councillor Drew Vaughan.
Thank you, Chair. I have no doubts it's already been discussed, but I couldn't see anything within the report. In terms of car ownership on the island, it seems to be going ever upwards. Have we looked into a car club on the sort of the model of the Zip car in London, which is incredibly popular, seems to really solve a big problem, and I think would be eminently suitable for the island? I assume that's something that has been discussed, but I think just in terms of where we're going next, is that a possibility? Are there conversations taking place? Thank you.
I'm sure it's a possibility. One thing about this whole process is that it's not just me. It's the entire council. It's the entire island. So part of this is encouraging those things more widely in the council. And I'd actually defer to my colleague, Councillor Jordan, if he were here, who has looked much more at that. He's the one who's been leading on electric vehicle charging points and so on. But it's part of a bigger process. And talking about what the steering committee can do, part of that structure is the Transport and Active Travel Hub. And part of that will be how can we make transport better, greener, more sustainable. Car sharing is an obvious part of that. I believe there are some things that have occurred within the council, but as I say, I'd have to defer to Phil for detailed answers on that. But it's also about getting people out of cars as well. You're right about numbers of cars, but we probably hit a peak car situation at some point. There can only be so many. I'm not sure if we've got that far yet. It is part of taking it forward. So whatever we can do, but as I say, in terms of specifics, because these are aims that are being dealt with not just within my portfolio, but across the entire cabinet portfolio and wider council, wider island. I'd defer for specifics on the specific point you raise.
On page 92, 93, we've got the current projects. There are 4 strategies there: energy strategy, planning strategy, flood risk strategy, and fleet strategy. Might it be appropriate for those, once they're actually developed, to come back to this meeting?
I'd be surprised if they didn't, yes. well, planning strategy you've seen once already. I'm just running down this. Energy strategy is very much in development. There are, of course, a number of projects ongoing by various utilities at the moment that will feed into that. And we have the Ofgem news that I related a little bit earlier. So that's probably a little way off some months, but certainly I'd hope that that would get Scrutiny's eye in due course. The others you mentioned, sorry, new glasses. But I think the vehicle charging strategy, again, I'd for specifics defer to Councillor Jordan on that, but I see no reason why that or indeed any of these should not come before scrutiny. It's your job.
Any more questions, comments on the climate change? No?
I'd just like to propose that we accept the report.
Yeah. Someone second that? Yeah, Councillor Lever. Those in favour of accepting the report? Carries. We move on to members' question time. I don't think we've got any written questions. So anyone want to ask a verbal question? Councillor Lilly.
I asked a question previously at previous meetings and not really got a satisfactory answer. I expect from this meeting just to get a written answer. But my question goes again on the old Ice Arena building in Ryde, which it was reported about some time ago when I asked the question again, that it was going to be sold, the lease was being sold by the AEW for confidential reasons, we can mention who that was, but that doesn't seem to have happened, and that large building is still an eyesore on the seafront and the gateway to the island through Ryde, and I just would like to say yet again through corporate scrutiny, could we have an answer what is happening with that building? Thank you.
We'll pass that on, Chairman, to the appropriate member and director.
Any written answer to be circulated to all members of the.
Yes, thank you. I think we're all interested in that. Thank you.
Any other questions? No? In that case, I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much.